can you assure the world that as you try to get control of these areas, you are not going to use military or economic coercion?
No.
And now we got to check in with Trump because he's taking his trolling to new levels that I'd never seen before and I didn't know were possible. Basically, Trump keeps talking about three things, or actually kind of four things now. Some of them are harmless and kind of hilarious. Like he's been going on about this bit about renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America.
We're going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, which has a beautiful ring that covers a lot of territory. The Gulf of America, what a beautiful name. And it's appropriate.
And I find that hilarious. Like it's just the most meaningless, but kind of funny, kind of savage, just like blindly pro-patriotic, pro-America thing. And actually, I've seen some memes, really, I don't know whether they're particularly accurate, like suggesting that more of the Gulf of Mexico actually borders on America than does on Mexico. But regardless, like, to me, it's just totally harmless and kind of funny, and I see nothing wrong with it. So when he does trollish stuff like that, and now, of course, his supporters in Congress, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, she literally introduced legislation enacting a formal name change to the Gulf of America.
I was so fired up watching the press conference today that I directed my ledge staff to immediately draft legislation, and we are entering it right now to officially change the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. And Congress has to do this because we have to fund the name change in maps. We have to fund the name change through all types of, like the military, FAA, et cetera.
In one sense, it's like, all right, don't we have more important things to be working on than this? But in another sense, it's funny and ultimately kind of harmless. So on that level, troll away as far as I'm concerned. Whatever. I'd rather have him doing that than enacting huge tariffs. But then it comes to actual territories. For example, particularly three have been in focus. Greenland, which is sort of owned by Denmark, but operates mostly autonomously. It's this massive island that's mostly a hunk of ice, but has a lot of natural resources, a pretty small population. Potentially acquiring it for the United States, as well as reacquiring the Panama Canal, or even, in his most outlandish thing he keeps suggesting, first as a joke, but increasingly I'm starting to wonder if it's not a joke, acquiring Canada as the 51st state, which we'll get into it. But first, here's a clip of Trump being asked whether he would commit to doing all of this peacefully or whether he'd be open to military or economic coercion to accomplish it. And he just says no. Take a listen.
To Greenland and the Panama Canal, so forth. Can you assure the world that as you try to get control of these areas, you are not going to use military or economic coercion?
No.
And can you tell us a little bit about what your plan is? Are you going to negotiate a new treaty? Are you going to ask the Canadians to hold a vote? What is the strategy?
Yeah, I can't assure you. You're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. But I can say this. We need them for economic security.
Wow. So some people, particularly kind of liberal media types, are freaking out over this clip, suggesting, oh my God, he's going to start wars. He's going to invade Greenland, invade Panama, invade Canada, all this stuff. Take a deep breath. I don't think he's actually going to do that. What he's saying here, to give the devil his due, is I won't take anything off the table. And that's a very Trumpian art of the deal. The same way he was asked, many times when he was president the first time, will you take a nuclear first strike off the table against so-and-so? And he always says no. And people are like, oh my God, doesn't mean he's going to nuke anybody. It means that in his negotiation kind of perspective, he doesn't want to take anything off the table. It feels that it gives him more leverage, the threat of something. So I can say two things at once. Simultaneously, we should not invade militaristically Greenland to take it over. And also the fact that Trump won't rule out some kind of coercion or aggression to acquire it if he thinks it's important to our national security isn't surprising and isn't particularly controversial. If he were to actually start new wars to try to conquer new territories, that would be wrong, and it would also be out of step with what his voters voted for. They voted for America first, an end to foreign entanglements, focus on our problems at home, not starting new wars of territorial acquisition. That is not what people want. And if he actually goes there, we can criticize him for it. But I think at some point we have to stop taking every single little word that he says so seriously and so literally, and realize, especially when it comes to these kinds of like negotiations, that a lot of it's bluster. And I think this mostly falls into that. But I do want to talk about the actual substance of this issue here, because people are seriously talking about, for example, the acquisition of Greenland. And I want to go on record and say, I think it's an interesting idea and I'm open to it. But I think it should not, of course, be done through a military invasion. It would be wrong and immoral to take over Greenland by force, just seize it. We don't need to do that. That's not necessary. But it does have vast natural resources. It is a location with militaristic and strategic importance in terms of connecting Europe and America, and having somewhere in the middle to potentially have bases from, or have troops based or aircraft, all sorts of things. And Greenland doesn't really have the resources to exist in terms of its economy completely independently. And so it's sort of owned as a territory of Denmark, but Denmark doesn't really have any authority over them. So what we could easily do, I don't think we should offer Denmark money to purchase Greenland because they don't really have any fair claim to it. What we should do is try to convince the people of Greenland to join America of their own accord and then welcome them in, whether we do that through an economic proposal or through some kind of vote or poll of the citizens of Greenland. I'm open to that kind of thing. I'm not open to simply seizing them by militaristic force, but I don't really think Trump's going to do that. I think it's just bluster. And I think people need to stop getting out ahead of their skis over every single thing he says. All right. Like, didn't we learn that from his first presidency? Not to get too worked up about words alone, and wait and see which crazy ideas he actually puts into action. And then we can talk about those. But like, we can't just freak out every time he says something slightly off kilter. Like, calm down. The Canada one is a funny joke to me. It's hilarious to me when he calls Justin Trudeau Governor Trudeau. But it's not actually something I would ever consider as a good idea. Acquiring Canada, making it the 51st state. It's so big, it would really need to be like 4 states or 5 states. It's huge populace for a couple of reasons, but one of which is like Canada's political culture is not something I want in the US. Their population is very left-leaning and doesn't share American values about things like self-defense or free speech. Some do. Not all, but not even most, unfortunately. But a lot don't. And you would basically be adding a bunch of states that are going to send far left senators to the Senate and members of Congress to Congress and have tons of electoral votes to vote for president. You'd be skewing our politics far to the left in our federal system, which is not something I think we should do. Now, what I think we should do is have more trade and more openness with them as our neighbors, but we can do that without acquiring them by force or even through like voluntary means, which they wouldn't do. They don't want that. Even their conservative leaders have said they don't want to become part of America. So it really would have to be through force. And I don't want a war to acquire Canada. Like, that needs to stay a meme. If Trump actually tried to do that, that would be crazy. What's strange about this to me, though, is that Trump simultaneously wants to restrict trade with Canada as it's a foreign nation through his tariffs. He enacted a bunch of tariffs on Canada when he was president. He wants to do some broad-based tariffs, which are taxes on goods imported into the country. But what does he think would happen if it joined America? It would all become free trade, and they would be able to import and send things and sell things to the other states with no restrictions of any kind. So it's like, that part of it sounds basically good to me. I think we should have very close to open trade with them without them becoming part of our country. But he's so opposed to that. While they're a foreign country, but were they to join the US, it's somehow totally different and now no longer harmful to American workers or to American consumers. Like, I don't understand that. That seems like total inconsistency to me. And he keeps posting about this, and it's really hard to tell if it's 100% a meme or a joke at this point, or if he's starting to mean it kind of seriously. And I hope for his sake, for the sake of America and for the sake of Canada, that it stays in the territory of memes and trolling and isn't something he's actually seriously considering. Because again, it would be political suicide for our country in terms of skewing us far to the left. And we can achieve the benefits of unification with Canada, things like opening trade up and having access to more of their natural resources. We can just achieve that through free trade. We don't need to make them part of our country. I just think that's kind of crazy. But maybe he's just joking. We'll have to see. And I again encourage everybody to stop taking his bluster so seriously and wait and see. What does he actually do when he's in office? And we'll talk about it seriously then when we have actions to analyze and not just kind of posturing, rhetoric, and late night posts on Truth Social. But what do you guys think about all this crazy stuff with Trump and Canada and Greenland? Let me know in the comments below. Do hit that like button while you're at it, and make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet.